Hi again then guys, and welcome to another specific car review for Gran Turismo Sport, and this time we're talking about a car which, at least from what I heard, was probably the most anticipated Vision GT car of Gran Turismo Sport. And initially it was actually not anticipated for GT Sport, it was going to be anticipated for GT6, because this car was announced way before Gran Turismo Sport's release, while we were still, or at least the majority of us, were still playing GT6. Along with, at a very similar time, the Hyundai N2025. And for understandable reasons, people wanted to get their hands on this cool Bugatti. I remember personally when Bugatti first announced that they would be making a VGT, that they showed the car's roof section with the, I think it's the engine bay cover, that they showed a picture of as a teaser of what the car was going to look like. And instantly you could tell that this was going to be very much so a racing Bugatti. Something which potentially for many of us did what we wanted to see for years. I know for me personally, I'd always wanted to see a full-on, in effect, race version of the Veyron, because the Veyron has such innate potential for that kind of performance that it never gets the chance to deliver on, because of the fact that it's just not that kind of car. Because it's not a track day special, it's not designed to break lap records, it's designed to break straight line records, but then at the same time be able to be a car that you can trundle around town in like an Audi, or a Merc, or a Beamer. And that's great, because it's easy to take the Veyron and the Chiron even for granted, because we've been with the car for so long now, and even when it was first released there were people who didn't like it that much, and I'm not saying that I love Bugattis in the modern age, I wouldn't say that I do. But loving a car and respecting it are two very different things. And even though I don't love the Veyron, or in this case the Chiron-based Vision GT car, I can respect very much what Bugatti is going for and what they really did achieve. Because the Veyron is a car that, as I said, we've got so used to that we almost have contempt for it. The familiarity breeds contempt principle really does apply to Bugattis, because they're so good that we take that for granted. We expect them to be that good. And so when vehicles like Hennessy or SSC with the Ultimate Aero, or a variety of others come along, we are instantly drawn to what they are capable of, because we've had the Bugatti there for so long. Now, the Bugatti is not the greatest of track cars on GT6. The Veyron is far from being a great cornering machine, because it's big, it's heavy, the all-wheel drive doesn't exactly help around low-speed corners, but in a straight line it's a monster. So of course the important question for this car, being more of a Chiron variant than a Veyron variant, is does it solve that issue? Is it more of a track car in a technical sense, or is it more a straight line missile which happens to have more downforce? Well, I'm glad to say that it's not just a straight line machine, by any means. With that being said though, it is a Bugatti with a huge amount of power. This is one of the most powerful cars in the game, so of course it's going to be quick in a straight line. Even in this video, in fact, you can see the car getting up around 280 miles per hour, even though the Tokyo Expressway has not exactly the longest of straights as far as Gran Turismo's past goes, certainly no way near something like the Le Mans or Route X, for instance. So straight line performance is a given. The acceleration is crazy fast. I mean, it's got 1,626 horsepower, 1,353 pound-feet of torque, so of course it's quick, especially in a car that only weighs 1,400 kilos anyway. Now, 1,400 kilos is at the same time a lot more than pretty much any of the other Vision GT cars in the game, but at the same time, with pretty much any Bugatti, as far back even as the EB110, if you want to look at it that way, they've always had a very similar approach to what Nissan did with the GTR. And that is that even though the car is heavy, there's a reason for that. It's not just heavy because it has really heavy leather seats or something like that. It's heavy because it's literally packed full of tech. So, in a similar way to vehicles like the LaFerrari and the Porsche 918 and the McLaren P1, those cars are not necessarily as lightweight as they would have been were they made, for instance, 10 to 15 years ago, because supercars in, say, the early to late 2000s were going as light as possible, more often than not. Stuff like the Gumpert Apollo, for instance, they weren't trying to add tech to the car, they were trying to lower the weight. Mosler, Ascari, they're all going for that kind of thing. And even something like, for instance, a Lamborghini or an SLR, they don't weigh as much as they would now with the extra tech and stuff like hybrid systems with batteries that the McLaren, the Ferrari, the Porsche have. So the fact that this one is heavier doesn't even stand out as much anymore, because a lot of exotic cars are getting heavier these days because of the tech put into them. So vehicles like the Veyron and the Nissan GTR don't necessarily stand out as much as they used to. Now, with that being said, you can of course feel the weight in corners, especially when you combine it with all-wheel drive. Now, the all-wheel drive on this car is something which you need to take a little bit of care with, because it's not a bad handling car, and I wouldn't even really say it's a particularly challenging car either. It's quite beginner friendly, in fact. But the handling does have a switch point. For speeds below, let's say 100 miles per hour, so through a tight corner, generally speaking, it becomes very heavy. The front end, in particular, feels like it has too much grip, even on hard tyres, and of course the downforce isn't working quite as well at that speed. But then once you get above 100, and you're going through your, say, mid-speed corners between 100 and, say, 150, 160, it can sometimes then have a very strange case of snap oversteer, where you make a small adjustment based on the intuition that you had from the low-speed heaviness, but now it doesn't apply at all, because that same heavy steering that you dealt with in the low-speed corners doesn't apply. The handling changes significantly once you get into higher speeds. The turn-in becomes much sharper, which is kind of weird. That's the exact opposite to what a car would usually do, and it takes a little bit of getting used to cope with that. And you might even be able to see that on some of the corners where I was driving it here, because usually with a car, it is, as you'd expect, looser the slower you're going. That's pretty much the way most cars work, and then as you drive faster it becomes harder and harder to turn. That's, as I said, what you'd expect a car to be like. With this one it's the exact opposite, and that can definitely take some getting used to. But overall, the fact that it has all-wheel drive means that you can definitely put the power down a lot easier than with rear-wheel drive, and the fact that the all-wheel drive actually helps you in this car, not like in the Peugeot L750, which I mentioned yesterday. This one is a car which, when you go into GT Sport, if you are looking forward to it, I think you're going to like it. The lack of tuning is unfortunate, because it definitely has more potential, and I personally feel that I could definitely make the handling better if I were able to adjust the suspension, and I know some of you guys are confident in yourselves in that regard as well. But at least what we do have to work with is still more than enough to win you some races. It's not necessarily going to outrun something like the McLaren VGT or the Chaparral, but it's certainly good enough to take on, of course, any supercar, most LMPs, and on circuits such as here at Tokyo, which allow you to really use that immense straight line power, it can be quite a useful car. So overall, that's it for this particular pick. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.